Hello and welcome to the Geek Gallery, where we strain to entertain, and welcome to the second episode of The Writer's Block. Now, during today's episode, we're going to take a look at another one of my favorite webcomics. This one has been around a bit more recently than Sabrina Online, though it updates much more infrequently. This one has also built up a huge fan base, almost to match Sabrina Online's since its inception. I am, of course, talking about that great Canadian classic, VG Cats. Created back in 2001 by Canadian comic book artist Scott Ramsomere, this comic is basically a satire of all things in the video game industry and video games themselves. And trust me when I say no one is spared in this comic. Link, Mario, all the greats are here and parodied to quite a big extent. I mean, Scott definitely does not fall victim to the fanboy syndrome here. Now, the comic itself follows a very episodic format, meaning that you'll never really see very much continuity between strips. Past strips are sometimes referenced in later strips, but it doesn't happen very often. Still, the comic has a very large cast of recurring characters, the two main of which are Leo Leonardo III, a very dim-witted, kind of slow gray cat, and his partner Ares, who is a pink cat, a tomboy, and just generally a badass. Now, I'll start off by saying that the jokes in this comic are hilarious. They're very well written, they often pertain to something that's going on within the gaming industry itself, or even within politics. It's just really well thought out. Of course, not everybody would find it as well written as I do. I mean, fanboys all over the globe don't exactly like the idea of their favorite characters or games being lampooned in this way, and some of the subject matter does tend to veer away from video games and onto some pretty sensitive topics such as abortion, rape, or other things. But you have to remember to approach it with an open mind. This is meant to be comedy, and of course it's politically incorrect. Nobody wants to be politically correct anymore. Now, of course, I'll be the first to admit that I don't love every single strip that he's done. I mean, there are a few that I feel overstep their bounds a little bit, but again, you have to kind of remember, it's comedy. What else do you expect? I will also say that the only other thing that really annoys me about the comic is its update time. While Mondays are set as its update time, Scott very rarely makes this deadline. In fact, you can just leave it to him to turn that into a joke as well. A majority of the strips make fun of the fact that the comic is never updated on a weekly basis, or almost never is. Though, due to their length and his pretty hectic personal schedule, I can pretty much see how that would become a problem. It should also be noted that while the comic is very satirical and often offensive, there really are some very sweet moments in it, like his most recent Christmas strip, and this one right here, which parodies not only Metal Gear Solid, but also a few other games as well, and it also shows how Leo and Ares care for one another. So there is some continuity and canon in their relationship, though it doesn't show itself very often. There's really not much more to say about the comic itself. It doesn't really go much deeper than trying to entertain us and make us laugh. And offend few of us. It does all three of these things very well, and I do highly recommend it. Some people would say it's flat or not very interesting, but me, I find it very interesting as both a gamer and a reviewer. It got onto this show, didn't it? But there are a few other things about it that could be talked about. For example, it used to have its very own, well, it came close to having its very own Flash animation series. Created and written by Chris Bow, another web cartoonist, well, this semi-series, it never really got past the first half of the first episode. This is the only real part of it that ever made it to the public. And judging by the quality of some of the jokes and, well, the animation in general, I think that's how it should stay. I mean, it had one or two funny jokes, but for the most part, this just did not seem like VG Cats. You could pretty much take Leo, Eris, and any other characters from the actual comic and replace them with anyone else, and it would have made just as much sense. Seriously, just take a look at this one little joke and you'll see the type of quality that I'm talking about here.
I mean, come on.
How was I supposed to know he was serious about being on that show? I mean, it's the middle of frickin' Kansas. Black people don't live in Kansas.
Get that right, sucker.
Fear not, though, for the fans have responded. There's a small series going on YouTube right now called the VG Cats adaptation with no name. Slightly appropriate, I suppose. But it's actually really good. I mean, you might think it wouldn't be considering that it's just a fan dub over the comic itself. And Lord knows we get enough of those on YouTube already, but this one is different. This one is good and high quality. The characters are very funny, the voices are very appropriate, and it's read in a way that makes the comic even more hilarious than it already is. The visual effects and the gags that they throw in also really add to an already very enjoyable experience. Not to mention, the sound effects that they use, they're all appropriate, and it actually feels more like a movie than anything else. I mean, just take a look at this, and tell me it's not epic. Not to mention, this is probably the only time in my life I've ever legitimately laughed at an orphan being electrocuted.
Sir, Toad Power Buckle, it's ever so cold.
Oh, that never gets old. Anyway, the series is being produced by someone named Omadon on YouTube, and it's about 11 episodes long now, and that's not counting the 2 holiday specials they've done and the outtake special. I highly recommend that you go and watch this series in your spare time. In fact, anything having to do with VG Cats is definitely worth a look about. If you have a few spare minutes, just go to the website and check it out. You definitely won't be disappointed. It's one of the funniest, albeit unsubtle, comics I've ever read, and that's probably one of its only drawbacks. Trust me, if you love video games, you will find something to love and hate about this comic. So that's it for this episode. So I guess I'll just... No, I'm not forgetting anything. What? No, I'm not forgetting. I am not going to do that. No, I'm not going to subject myself to such torment. You're not going to let me forget, are you? Fine. Ladies and gentlemen, next time on the Geek Gallery, the sheer and epic demonic scale of a game known simply as Looney Tunes Acme Arsenal. Fuck. Bet you thought we were done with that joke, didn't you?
In 1812, Madison was mad. He was the president, you know. Well, he thought he'd tell the British where they ought to go. He thought he'd invade Canada. He thought that he was tough. Instead, we went to Washington and burned down all his stuff in the White House. Burn, 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 and we're the ones that did it. It burned, 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 while the president ran and cried. It burned, 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 and things were very historical. And the Americans ran and cried like a bunch of little babies.